Jones makes many rational economists reject the idea of bubbles.
I used to think I knew what the word bubble meant, but I don't think I know what it means anymore. I canceled my subscription to The Economist because the word bubble appears 3 times in every page there now, and I think it's just totally gratuitous. It's mindless.
Bubbles sound innocuous, but financial journalist Justin Fox has studied their history and discovered what happens when they burst. The first financial bubble involved something highly unlikely.
In the 1630s in the Netherlands, people were buying and selling tulip bulbs. Complete mass insanity in Holland for a couple of years there, where hundreds of people, artisans, would leave their workshops and set up business as florists, they call themselves. Even for the most part, what they really were tulip bulb traders. And it was a real financial market.
The price of tulips in Holland rose to such a level that the value of one tulip bulb would sometimes be the same as that of an entire house.
Over a 3-year period, the price of tulip bulbs rose and then began to soar. By some accounts, almost half the money in the Dutch economy was caught up in trades involving tulips.
To a lot of historians, this is really the first example of a financial bubble, even though it was basically tulips.
People were buying them not primarily because they liked tulips, but they were buying them because they thought that the price was going up and they could resell them to someone else at a higher price.
On February 5th, 1637, the most expensive bulb in Holland failed to sell, and tulip investors panicked.
Then it burst as prices start falling, and then they're falling more, and then you start thinking, you know, I remembered I doubted that tulips could possibly be worth so much. Maybe I better get out fast. And then everyone starts dumping, and then it just drops.
As the prices plunged, leading citizens found themselves bankrupt. Some historians estimate it took a generation for the Dutch economy to recover. There have been many bubbles and crashes since, but the most famous happened closer to home. The year 1929 began with optimism. Stock prices had been rising for 8 years, and in '29, they were soaring.
The 1920s was a great decade economically. The economy was booming, industry was booming, and toward the latter part of the decade, financial markets just sort of went from reflecting that boom to kind of creating it. It was just boom times all over. By the late 1920s, there was just this feeling, new era.
Observers described feverish emotions as thousands of investors paid ever higher prices for stocks.
In the so-called roaring 20s, the stock market went through an enormous bubble. People thought it would never end.
But then, on October 29th, prices suddenly dropped, and the mood turned to one of panic and fear. Over 9,000 American banks failed, wiping out the life savings of millions.
It led to a depression that lasted over 10 years.
We had 25% unemployment for most of the decade of the 1930s.
It was an event that was driven by a real change in people's psychology that led them to be very optimistic and positive in the 20s and then negative in the 30s.
This view that emotions can drive an economy up or down became the conventional wisdom of the 1930s through the work of the renowned British economist, John Maynard Keynes.
There's no danger of a serious rise in the cost of living.
Keynes believed financial markets arrived at prices in a pretty crazy fashion. His classic quote is that the market can stay irrational longer than you can stay solvent.
Keynes said emotions could cause prices to soar and then collapse. And to protect the economy from these dangerous bubbles, the markets had to be firmly regulated by government. Keynes, though, could never explain exactly what the mechanism was.
Keynes never got past the fuzzy stage, and it didn't lead him to a precise mathematical model. And that's why, ultimately, Keynes was rejected by the profession.
Now, after the crash of 2008, behavioral economists are struggling to do what Keynes could not: show precisely how human emotions affect prices. Their ideas are so influential that behavioral experiments are now conducted even at the University of Chicago, the citadel of rational economics. One explores a mysterious psychological bias.
We are interested in how much you would pay for this mug or one identical to it.
These students have been told to work out the price of a common consumer item.
Travel mug in beautiful maroon.
They're asked first what they would be prepared to pay to buy the mug.
Think about it for a moment and then write down the maximum amount you'd be willing to pay for this mug or one identical to it.
They offer an average of $6.
So we now have 6 of these mugs. We're just going to raffle them off by selecting a few people at random.
And then they're given the same mug for nothing. An hour later, they're asked how much they'd be willing to sell it for. In rational economics, the price should be exactly the same. After all, the value hasn't changed. But the average price they want for the mug now is $9.
Wanted to sell the mug back once you had it, you gave a higher price.
It just made it seem a little bit more special because it was going to be something useful to me.
Anybody else?
Well, I got this mug by complete luck, and so it's important to me, and I have to charge this much for it.
The emotional pleasure of owning something for just an hour pushed the price up by 50%. It's an unexpected outcome, suggesting we're unaware of the emotions that drive this behavior. At Harvard, researchers are exploring the financial impact of these subtle influences. The team is led by Jennifer Lerner.
I'm a social psychologist, not a clinical psychologist. I don't do counseling, therapy, etc. I do experiments in a laboratory. I come with the assumption that much of what's going on in terms of influencing a decision is outside of conscious awareness.
Lerner explores all sorts of emotions. Today, it's sadness and how it impacts financial decisions.
We're going to start by placing these 2 sensors. They measure skin conductance or sweating response.
The experiment is designed to induce emotions at such a low level, the subjects aren't aware of them.
Does that feel comfortable?
Yes.
So the researchers use sensors to track the physiological effects of the emotion.
Now we're going to get ready to collect the first saliva sample.
From heart and breathing rate to the hormones in saliva.
These are physiological signals from the subjects. When we have them first come in, they sit and have a period of quiet rest, relaxing music, that sort of thing, so that we can see what they're like at baseline. And then we use that to compare what happens when they might be in the midst of a stressful financial decision.
Among other activities, the subjects watch a scene from a sad movie. Unbeknownst to them, this triggers low-level sadness. Their sensors reveal the emotional change.
The decision makers in our studies are completely unaware that the sadness is impacting them. And when we ask them, did the film you saw change your responses in any way, they say no.
It's time for the financial test. The subjects are directed to make a series of financial choices. Then they are asked how much they would pay for a consumer product, in this case, a water bottle. Lerner compares their choices to those of a group not shown the sad video.
Here's an example of a subject in the neutral condition, and this subject is telling us that they would like to buy it at $2.50. And that contrasts with here, we have data from a subject who's in the sad condition, and this subject is willing to pay $10 to obtain the water bottle. And that is very representative of what we see. You get this increased valuation when you're sad.
If sadness can lead people to pay 4 times more for a water bottle, what happens when the stakes are higher?
The experiments have been done with high stakes money, $1,000, etc. And what we find is that these results scale up, even when you use big money.
If emotions influence prices on the individual level, what about markets and the larger economy? According to rational economics, these are driven by individual self-interest. But for Robert Shiller, this ignores something obvious.
Humans are empathetic animals, uniquely empathetic. We're not just communicating ideas, we're communicating emotions. That's what empathy means. It's different from sympathy. It's that I am feeling the same. I know what you're experiencing because it's in my body too, the same feeling that you have.
There's a hot real estate market in many parts of the country.
If Shiller is right, could empathy explain how the hyper-optimism of the housing market jumped like a social contagion to the financial markets?
Well, the real estate market has grown to new heights and new prices.
Among professional traders, the idea that moods flow through markets is taken for granted.
The market is an aggregation of what thousands of people think the future is going to be like. And if these people are optimistic about the future, the market goes up. And if people are pessimistic about the future, the market goes down. But at the end of the day, the question the market answers is, are people optimistic or are they pessimistic? And that's a psychological question. Emotion still drives the markets.
They're saying that the bubble will not burst. There's plenty.
For rationalists, emotions are not a satisfactory explanation for how markets work.
The observation that people feel emotions means nothing. And if you're going to just say, oh, markets went up because there was a wave of emotion, you got nothing. That doesn't tell us anything about what circumstances are likely to make markets go up and down. That would not be a scientific theory.
The rationalists' conviction is based on the mathematical model they use to understand the financial markets. It's called the efficient markets hypothesis, and it says that financial markets act essentially like a giant calculating machine, efficiently processing all relevant information faster than any individual could. So if some traders are emotional, it doesn't matter.
Efficient markets can exist side by side with irrational behavior as long as you have enough rational people to bring prices in line.
In the efficient markets model, the financial markets themselves are rational, and prices at any moment in time cannot be wrong. It was a model invented by Eugene Fama.
It's a pretty good model. For almost every practical use you would put that model to, it works pretty well. It created a big fuss, and the fuss persists to this day.
The fuss persists because for many behavioralists, the theory implies financial markets should be immune from criticism or control.
The theory is that we have to look at markets as oracles. When the market moves up, we have to say, what is the wisdom of the market telling us today?
If markets are efficient, there's no real need for government, because the market itself will make sure that prices are always equal to the right price.
Instead of regulation, rationalists believe the markets will come up with their own mechanisms for managing risk. And so they have. The first was invented here at the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, where traders handle vast sums of money all the time.
I'm an independent trader, and I trade my own money, 50 contracts to 100 contracts at a time. That's basically a $50 million to $100 million contract size.
Traders here make their money by effectively offering to insure people against risk, including agricultural producers of pork bellies and oranges.
Long before this orange became an orange, the farmer had to grow it. Well, he doesn't know what will be the price of that orange when it comes to the market finally 10 months later. Will he make a profit?
As protection, farmers take out contracts to insure themselves against the price of oranges dropping.
Nowhere in the market are you going to see an orange